Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Mamluks podcast. My name is Sim. Along with me are my co-hosts, Mahin Islam, the host of Sultans and Sneakers, and we have from the Muzzy Buzz podcast, Mort, and the one and only Sheikh Amr Saeed. Folks, we have a wonderful episode for you guys this afternoon, but before we get started, help us out on patreon.com/the Mad Mamluks, and if you are so inclined, make sure you comment in the comment section below and let us know your thoughts on the episode, and be sure to click on like on the episode. We have a man who requires no introduction, Ustad Nouman Ali Khan, founder of Bayina Institute, multi-million following.
Some metric, whatever metric you want to.
I don't know what metric you want to follow, but you can follow his YouTube subscribers, the amount of people who have studied at Bayina, just tremendously influential. Someone who's made such a huge impact over the past decade to decade and a half, maybe, right? Welcome to the show, Stud.
It's good to be here. Thank you, guys.
All right. Well, let's start things off and tell us about. Let me tell you a little bit about how we had Irtiza Hassan, who was the founder of one of the founders of Al-Maghrib Institute, along with a couple other people. But
actually, first, we want to also validate the story because we know he's a BSer. So go ahead and tell him because he just mixed something up. But we'll tell you the story. That about how he met you in Jersey maybe like 15 years ago. He was the managing director, I think, originally of.
I remember that meeting.
Yeah. Okay. So it's partially true. So anyway, still go into details.
Yeah. So he starts off, telling us about how he's driving to Jersey with you. Well, he first got an email at info@almaghrib.com or whatever, and he's like, he gets an email from someone named Nouman Ali Khan, and he's saying that, hey, I got some ideas I want to present, and he's like, okay, well. Let's meet up somewhere in New York or New Jersey or whatever. And he's like, it wasn't too far away from where some relative or friend of his was. So he met you and he took you on a drive while you guys were both driving. You're explaining to him your idea and your vision of what you wanted to do with your program, making the Arabic language a integral part of education and, immersing young Muslims into the Arabic language. So he's and it is kind of giving the story as it's like, he's like, yeah, he seemed really eager, but I didn't know how to incorporate this kind of a program into a traveling institute, an institute that's traveling from city to city.
But not only that, can I just butt in? He's like, there's this Desi guy that I know he's got some really cool ideas, but I'm thinking more on a business level and thinking, how are we going to incorporate this guy? He seems very sincere. He seems like he's got a great idea. And thing about Irtiza is we love him. When Mahin says that he's a BSer, we actually love him to death. I love the guy, but he's really funny. And when you're with him, you don't know if he's telling the truth or not. But anyways, go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So, well, basically, he went on and explained to us that
it was a big mistake. He regrets. Yeah. It's one of his biggest life regrets. He could have gotten you. He could have gotten you on board back then. You know what I'm saying? It would have been a match made in heaven. But he dropped the ball. That's probably why he got fired. That's probably why Muhammad Sharif fired him. I think. It's like, you know what I'm saying?
Well, alhamdulillah,
he didn't get fired just for
Yeah, I do remember that story. So back then, when I had first started, I don't even think it was called Bayina yet. It was called Husna Learning Foundation at the time. Right. And I had traveled to maybe 20 communities with it by that time. And Al-Maghrib was becoming a phenomenon. And what I saw in it, like its probably most impressive strength was the volunteer base, like the support system that they created, the Qabila system that they created in every community, and how eager those people were to, honestly, what I saw it as being a community activist for a while, even back then, was they filled a community void. Young people did not have something to galvanize around and to be part of, to feel meaningful. And unfortunately, many masajid did not serve that extended role of community, engagement that Al-Maghrib kind of created. It created a family environment, a community environment for these people. And I was kind of a loner. I was doing pretty much everything on my own with a handful of help, and that was just kind of practical help kind of thing. And I thought, man, these guys are so eager to study Islam, to teach Islam, and I've got this thing that I know is revolutionary in how Arabic can be taught. And I don't need to step into any of the spaces that they operate in, what they teach and what they cover. And what I have to teach is fundamentally, I hate to use the term, but it's non-denominational. It doesn't really affect any of the ideological lines that they may subscribe to or not subscribe to. So I thought it was a really good collaborative effort opportunity, right? I didn't want to incorporate myself in them. I'm a big believer in independence, but I said, man, there's an opportunity for collaboration. You can keep your existing network. I already have an operation. I already have something that works. I've already tried it in several communities. So it's not a concept. It's already, the proof of concept is already there. But I think it's a good opportunity for a lot of these people that are probably, if there's this many hours they're spending in studying Islam, then it's a no-brainer that they want to learn Arabic. That's practically a no-brainer. And I've got something that can work. So I remember back in the day, I printed out my own brochure and cut it so it looked like it was a bleeding color print, and put it all together and put a package together and presented it to him. I remember all of that. How did that?
Nice. So Ustad, you remember when we first met in Columbus, Ohio in December of 2007. You think you were, I just remember you spending your days playing ping pong in the masjid basement. But I remember we were driving to a restaurant one day and you were saying that, like, at the time, it was probably a good, because Al-Maghrib in Columbus had a stigma, as it did a lot of communities, because you mentioned it was denominational in a sense, right? It had this ideological slant to it. And I think when you got on board, you were able to cross over all that stuff. So when you came to Columbus, you had students from all backgrounds attending. And I think that's something that, seemed to, I guess, there was no stigma with when Bayna came on. It was some kind of institute. I remember in Columbus, all the anti-Al-Maghrib guys were like, "Oh, Bayna is going to come and kick Al-Maghrib out," so we're happy about that, even though it's not just looking at it very superficially. But
I've been around the block, and this kind of talk about territorial, kind of who's taking over whose space, and what leaning are you, and what line is this institute versus that institute, et cetera, et cetera. Quite frankly, because I agreed to this conversation because I'm going to speak off the cuff a little bit. So quite frankly, most of that stuff is nonsense to me. I am an avid reader of Imam Ghazali's work. I'm an avid reader of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah's work. And in other people's minds, the twain shall never meet. I'm a huge fan of Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. And I learned a great deal from Sheikh Yasser Qadhi, and I don't see a contradiction. And I think that people that make a big deal out of contradictions in many cases, in my opinion, don't really have enough to support the fake passion that they bring to this debate. It is really a fake passion at the end of the day. Practically, for Muslims, they're just learning something. And what I saw in Al-Maghrib, in fact, the truth is I did collaborate with Al-Maghrib for a few years. And I did have a meeting with Sheikh Hamza at some point. He came to our campus and he wanted consultation for Arabic for Zaytuna Institute. And I did have that conversation with him some years ago too. But the point of it to me was that, that label was attempted at me several times. Like, are you this way or this way because you shared a platform with XYZ? Or are you this way or this way because you have a shared collaboration with Al-Maghrib? Because actually for a couple of years when we were collaborating, I would put in collaboration with Al-Maghrib even on our flyers. That happened, right?
Yeah. One of the things is that sometimes we get accused of is that by not taking a side or a firm stance, aligning ourselves or pushing our weight behind a certain scholar or a certain type of movement, that, we're, playing it careful, riding the fence or whatever, and we're not, I've been
sort of accused of that too. I'm too Sufi for some and too Salafi for others. I'm liberal for some and ultra conservative for others, et cetera, right? So, practically to me, the reality of it is that most of this stuff that's been blown out of proportion, for the average Muslim is irrelevant.
Yeah.
And in fact, in my life as a Muslim, for my kids, my family, my parents, most of this stuff is irrelevant. And I just don't have the mental space or the time to waste on this kind of ideological nonsense. There's too much positive to do to get caught up in this, this drag, honestly. I've engaged in such conversations before, entertained them, and I've realized after enough years of, obviously I was, brought up, my Islam was kind of coming up in New York City. So you get every ideological leaning under the sun, and they're all competing for space and for youth. More importantly, they're competing for youth, right? And the reality is they're poaching each other's youth too. Like, brother, come join our halaqa because they're on dalal. So
they're deviants. They're deviants. Yeah.
That stuff just fizzled away for me. Yeah.
I got a question. So this is kind of it's unique to me. It's interesting because I think all of us around the same age. I mean, give or take a couple years here and there. But I always found it like when I was being younger that it was always tough to navigate because you had to worry about which sect you were going to please in the masjid. So how did you avoid having to be like, pick up a label? Because I felt like everybody was trying to get a label. Like I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, everybody was trying to get a label. Like, are you this aqidah? Are you that group? And I think at least for all of us, all four of us, we kind of fell into that trap for a little bit. And I think as you get older and mature, you realize all of it's nonsense. Like you're wasting your time making PDFs on the internet and debating on forums. That's stupid. But so how did you navigate through that? And as an advice for people that are listening now and caught up in that as a younger generation, how did you navigate through that?
I don't think I was entirely out of it. I mean, I started off, one of my biggest influences early on, my first major influence, I think, in even becoming interested in Islam were two individuals that you would think are on opposite ends of the spectrum. One of them, and this is back in the cassette tape days after Jummah when you buy bootleg cassette tapes outside the masjid, right? So I was buying Hamza Yusuf tapes and Bilal Phillips tapes. Oh, wow. And in equal measure. There you go. There you have it, New York City in a nutshell. So I loved both of it. Like I loved all of it. And then over time, I became heavily engrossed in the work of Dr. Israr Ahmed through his student, Dr. Abdul Samia, which is obviously Tanzim Islami, which is an offshoot of Jamaat Islami, which is, the equivalent of, in America, maybe even though there's remnants of it left now, like ICNA and things like that, right? And Jamaat al-Talaba, etc., that Maududi background, etc., right? So I was fully indoctrinated to that. I was actually even doing tarbiyah programs for them at one point before it kind of fizzled out. And I was involved in attending halaqat of various different, very polar opposite kind of leanings. I've taken rihla courses. I've taken Aqidah classes at Madkhali Masajid in New York City. I used to attend some halaqat of the Hizb ut-Tahrir, and those guys used to come at me hard.
We still do.
So there was I was exposed to all of that, and I was practically labeled by each of them as some kind of thing or another. And I did have my own phases too along the way. But what stuck with me with Dr. Israr Ahmed, rahimahullah, some things of his really kind of became part of my genetic makeup, and other things I shed. And the thing that really I was impacted by was he used to call it ruju' ila al-Quran. He called the Ummah needs ruju' ila al-Quran. And for your English-speaking audience, a return to the Quran. That's what he called it. And he had other aspects of his thought that have to do with political revival and political Islam and an ideological reading of the Seerah and all that stuff. I have my take on those things. But this ruju' ila al-Quran thing hit me hard. It really hit me hard. And the more I got exposed to Quran study and contemplating Quran and studying Quran and deepening my appreciation of the Quran, all the other stuff that was going on at the MSA and all the other stuff that was going on in conferences and all the other subject matter that was being debated and discussed started becoming less and less interesting. It just started becoming noise. Even though it has value in its place, I get it, right? But man, I was more interested in Surah Al-An'am than I was in, sorry to say, fixing my aqidah with some halaqah, right? Or reading a second, what I call them secondary and tertiary texts, not to take away from our scholarly tradition, but there was an emphasis on the secondary text, the scholarly works, and a de-emphasis on the primary texts Even though the guys were touting things like Quran and Sunnah and Dalil, these words were being thrown out. Actually, you're only citing some selective portions of the sacred to make your point, and you have no clue what the rest of it's talking about. That's not even part of your curriculum.
It's like cherry picking.
It is, and the central, the key to me was the central subject was actually some kind of a topic, but the topic was never the Quran itself. The topic was never the seerah itself or the Quran itself. The topic was something else for which we will use seerah and Quran and hadith as supporting evidence, right? So what's in the higher place? It's your topic, or in some cases, it's your ideology, or it's your indoctrination process. And then everything else is just supporting evidence to make sure we fit in, right? And I started seeing through that more and more, because just because somebody's dropping dalils left and right doesn't mean that they're actually being genuine with the text. You can quote a 50 ayat and reach conclusion X, but the problem to me was it became very clear you reached your conclusion before you even looked at the supporting evidences. You collected the evidences second, you already had your predetermined conclusion, right? So now the Quran, ma'adallah, is surrendering to your conclusion. Instead of you, kalimatullahi hiya al-ulya, your conclusions should surrender to the word of Allah. This should dictate direction, not the other way around. And that's, as a result of that, I just said, if I'm going to talk, I'm just going to talk about an ayah. That's my topic. My topic isn't X, Y, Z. My topic is this surah or this ayah or this passage, or that became my topic. Why not put that in the top place?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Amr.
Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
No, I just had a question about that. I'm like, do you feel that is part of the reason why Muslims in general today are kind of lost in the sense where they're putting personalities over the Quran, and rather than actually understanding the Quran, they end up just kind of justifying personalities because they like them, or rather than actually saying, the Quran, looking at the Quran holistically, and then just saying, because the reason I'm saying this is because I think me and Amr were talking about this, and we were saying, you can find all kinds of opinions in Islam. You can look to a hadith, you can look to different, tafsir of the Quran, you can do whatever, but the more you get into it, you realize that, hey, there's a sea out there, and it's not that clear cut, you know what I mean? But when you look at the Quran, it's definitive. When the Quran speaks, it's almost definitive in the way that it is. So do you think that is what you fell in love with, the fact it's clear, and the fact that there's really no ambiguity in that?
So I used to think that way. I'll say a few things about that. So when it comes to our engagement with an audience, right? The masjid scene and the Islamic conference and the convention and the intensive course type scene, that's people that have some level of exposure or interest in Islam, even if at an introductory level, or they've been seasoned in some way, right? So if I'm giving a dars on Surah Al-Asr, then it didn't matter if I'm sitting in a masjid and the majority audience is from Jamaat, Tablighi Jamaat, or if they're Iqna or Isna or whatever line. Surah Al-Asr is just Surah Al-Asr to them. And they can't size me up yet because I didn't say anything size up worthy, because I'm just talking about. So it
checkmate.
It had a universal appeal because literally وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا in reality was you had people from different ideological lines that can't come up and say, hey, this is an issue in the khutbah you gave, because you've got every denomination in your audience in the Jum'ah, right? In many cities, and nobody's coming and saying there's a fiqh problem with your statement, or there's an ikhtilaf, this is هذا الأمر مختلف فيه, or whatever. Mm-hmm. They're not bringing it because everybody agrees on the Fatiha. Everybody agrees on so in that sense it is definitive and it's unifying. It's a very powerful force. The other is that what I realized is a lot of people that are non-Muslim or barely Muslim, barely clinging onto their faith, Quran discourse has an impact on them that any other religious discourse doesn't have. Like it resonates with them. Like I'll be talking about Quran at some convention center and the cleaning staff will come up to me and say, bro, where can I read more about that? There's a reason its original audience were people with no previous religious background, the Quraysh, right? And they're getting hit with it and it's impacting them. There's a reason. So there's a universality in it that with all due respect, there's a place and time and place for other Islamic subject matter, but I believe it's for targeted audiences. The universal messaging of our religion actually begins and ends with Quran. That's the universal messaging. So for that reason, I felt drawn to the Quran. Now, on the point of it's definitive, actually what pulled me out of even the group that I was a part of, or the groups that I was a part of, was when I started studying Quran in as much depth as I possibly could. And I had my limits, but whatever I could do, whatever Arabic study I could, further myself in, whatever tafsir engagement I could do in. Now I'm not going to take the lecture of my shaykh or teacher, and they said this about this ayah, so I'm going to regurgitate what they said. No. That's what they said. I noted it down. I'm going to think about it. Now I'm going to read the tafsir and see what they said. And I'll read one tafsir and I feel like, but that didn't answer my question. So I'll read another. By 2007 or 8, I was reading 26 tafsir of an ayah to just grasp what has been said about this. How are they thinking about it? And how come 25 of them didn't even think about the question I had in my head? Oh, number 26. Oh, thank God. Alhamdulillah. Okay, somebody thought about this.
I'm not a weirdo.
so the point that there's a richness to the study and the contemplation of the Quran, and there are many opinions on the Quran too, but even those many opinions still converge to the same direction. As opposed to in other subject matter, different opinions take you in completely different directions. They're not the same lane. They're not multiple lanes on the same highway. They're different highways altogether sometimes. But in this, there was still a level of kind of cohesion. That's very attractive to me. And plus, it's not just intellectual, it's spiritually so fulfilling.
Has there been any change to your fundamental premises in approach to the Quran since when you first developed your passion and I don't know, in terms of how you interpret, how you look at different types of meanings towards words or whether root words, have you had to alter your evaluation or your tafsir in any fundamental way?
Yeah, very fundamental ways actually. I think that I wouldn't say changed, but evolved would be the word. So in a sense, what I used to hold even when I was 19, 20 years old, I still hold, in fact. But there were other horizons in considering the world of studying and contemplating the Quran that I just didn't have access to. I didn't consider them. And that did, in fact, expand quite a bit. So the first of those areas was actually comparative tafsir. So that actually opened quite a bit of horizon for me, because even the things that you end up hearing from your imam or from a khatib or from a convention speech about this ayah, they're like, actually, there's a lot more to that, and that's none of the above. But there'll be that, right? What the other thing that happened with my Quran studies was there's not just tafsir literature. Tafsir is one genre of Quran study, the main genre, if you will. But there are people that have taken an area of Quran studies and dedicated their lives to it, right? Whether it's the language of the Quran or the historicity of the Quran or the Quran. Now there's an emerging field of the Quran and its biblical subtext, which is a massive field. The Quran and some of its vocabulary that has origins in foreign languages, which is a massive field. Then the Quran's relationship for me personally, the Quran's relationship with political science, sociology, and psychology are a particular interest. To give you a small, something I wouldn't have even thought of 10, 15 years ago, but now I can't help but think about it, for example, is that you have the Battle of Uhud, for example, Surah Ali Imran, right? And there's about 60 ayat commenting on Uhud. And in the middle of discussing the loss of life and the travesty of Uhud, Allah immediately starts talking about, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la ta'kulu riba ad'afa mudha'afa. Don't consume riba. And then it goes back to Badr, or rather Uhud. And you're in the middle of it like, what just happened? Why is this here? What's this doing here, right? And the Mufassirun will look at it a certain way. But one possible way to look at it is Uhud was a massive loss of life and massive loss of providers. They were men. They were heads of their households. Now the head of a household is gone in an already struggling economy. We all know Medina was poor, right? barely surviving. Muhajirun and Ansar, we know the setup. And now because of Uhud, they're economically devastated. And when you have economic devastation, people are going to be in debt. And when people are going to be in debt, then loan sharking will go on the rise. Right? And so this is the time to take advantage of desperate people. And that's what that's what banks exist for, is to take advantage of desperate people. Right? So it is the right time to say, you better not even think about riba, those of you that have. Right? Now that's a sociological, economic, where you understand the sociological dimension of the situation, the political, the economic dimension, and then you understand the depth of this statement before you go further. Because Allah is dealing with the outside enemy, He's also dealing with the inside enemy, the social evils inside Medina. Right? So those areas of thought have opened up more and more. And I'm really grateful to have a partner like Sheikh Suhaib Saeed. Our conversations, I'll give a lecture on an ayah, but our conversations are unfiltered. So I'll ask all kinds of politically incorrect questions about, wait, if you interpret it this way, then here's the problem, or here's a psychedelic idea. What do you think? And here's another deviation. What do you think about it? Like we're unfiltered in our study of Quran to explore answers, right? Right. And even when we're reading the greats like Alusi or Ibn Ashur or Razi or whoever else, I'll have the audacity to say, wait, that makes no sense. That's just silly. Bro, come on. I know you love Razi, but that one, come on.
But I think what's interesting is that conversation, though, can happen in certain settings. Like I think one of the things I was noticing is that, unfortunately, because of the internet and because of access to so much, I mean, especially from Western academia, the access to text to common laymen is bringing this kind of conversation out to the public when people with no qualifications are talking about that. And the reason why I bring this up is because it kind of leads me to my next question, which has been, maybe you've probably heard about it, and I'm sure other people are thinking about this, but there's been this huge blowback about the qira'ah of the Quran and the ahruf of the Quran, about how some scholars have some doubts about it, about the common narrative, we should say, right? Right. I'm curious to know, did you encounter any of that like doubtful matter, or did anything shake your understanding when you came across some of the classical texts, when you did a deep dive in the Quran, and because I feel like a lot of people now, especially on YouTube where I'm active, a lot of the opponents of Islam are making videos like, oh, there's holes in the narrative, there's holes in the Quran, there's holes in, the understanding that Muslims have about how these different styles of recitation were transmitted and things like that. So I guess I wanted to pose that to you in terms of coupling that with the fact that, there's access to information before to the layman that was really never there before. Do you get what I'm saying? Yeah.
There can be a long-winded answer to that. The short answer to that is doubts and, having your foundation shaken happens for people that study or read or get exposed to stuff about the Quran, but not the Quran itself. I concerned myself first and foremost with the Quran itself. And a lot of this stuff is about, I read this article about the Quran, about that ayah, about this paper, about this research, about this parchment or whatever. So you're circling around the Quran and finding stuff to critique. But my convictions only deepened in Allah's book and have never been shaken because I fundamentally engaged myself with a surah, an ayah. And I was very impacted by Amin Ahsan Islahi rahimahullah. He's written an Urdu book, Mabadi Tadabbur Quran, which is I think some have translated it into English also. I think the Renaissance people have translated it into English. It's called Prerequisites to Contemplating the Quran, right? And he says if you're not going to get benefit from the Quran, if you don't come to the ayah with the conviction that in it is something that will heal you, will guide you, will benefit you, and if you don't come seeking that, then you will get things, but not what Allah intends for you, right? So the mindset with which we approach the Quran, actually, for me, that was the first barrier. But that can also be like, oh, you're just spiritually biased, therefore you don't see the research for what it is. Somebody could argue that, right? My response to that has been that after you have that spiritual layer of protection, you start seeing the holes in the arguments that claim that have holes. But it's you're right. Now we're exposed to levels of criticism and levels of pseudo academic critique that the layperson has been able to get access to, and as a result, they feel they're in a position to criticize. Right now, the problem is the layperson doesn't have the tools to be able to criticize something that is far above their prerequisite knowledge. And the wrong answer to that the Muslim community has given is, you're not a scholar, you're not in a position to criticize it. That's the wrong answer. The right answer is, these criticisms are there, and if you want a real answer, you need to educate yourself. And here's a path to educating yourself, right? Instead of saying, you're not an alim, shut up, saying, here's the path to ilm, if you're interested, and facilitating that path for the average Muslim who says, I can't go to a seminary, I'm not going to be able to spend 10 years under a tree in a desert somewhere. What do? I got a full-time job. I'm a taxi driver. I'm a single mom. I'm a whatever. How am I supposed to do this? Well, okay, let's give you a path. So unconcern yourself with, hey, watch this video and you'll leave Islam. And how about you first find out what it is that you're trying to leave? You know?
No, I love that approach, and because I feel like a lot of that is, I think there's two problems that I see. Number one is, when doubts come, people say, ignore it. Don't even think about it, right? And the problem is, sometimes when they're being challenged, it's hard just to ignore something. We can't just sweep things under the rug, right? Because eventually that'll come back. We've done that so many times in our community where it comes to divorce or spousal abuse or, anything you have, even homosexuality. We've tried to sweep it under the rug, and then it ends up coming back 10 times worse and biting us right in the rear end. And I feel like the approach to that is really knowledge is power, like you just mentioned. The other thing is, I feel like also as Muslims, I feel like we've given Western academia the standard of how we look at Islamic texts in the Quran. And I feel like that we shouldn't have to feel that inferiority complex and say, well, wait a minute, if I look at it from your lens, okay, then now it doesn't make sense. But we should be from the position where, no, we have our own sciences. We have our own method of how we approach this. And I think we don't focus on teaching that so much. It's more like, just trust the Maulana down the street, or trust the guy that taught you. Like, he knows.
I agree. I also, and I don't, again, mean to be dismissive or condescending towards anybody who spent whether a month or a year or 5 years or 10 studying our religion, and whether they went to Deoband, or they went to Nadwatul Ulama, or they went to Azhar, or they went to Medina, or they went to Al Qura, or they went to Qarawin, wherever they went.
As long as you didn't go to Georgetown.
Huh?
As long as you didn't go to one of those Georgetown type universities.
Or even if you went to Georgetown, I say. Even if you went to Harvard Seminary, even if you went to wherever.
Those guys think they're sheikhs.
My thing is, without taking anything away from them, my issue is that we have lowered our standards for scholarship itself. Internally, we've had a lowering of our standards. So I've traveled quite a bit around the world. I've met some remarkable ulama, and I can only think of a handful that I say, man, if I have an intellectual issue and I'm stuck somewhere, who am I going to call on? Because the lay Muslim says, I have an issue, I'm going to go find the guy with the most popular YouTube videos and ask him how to solve my life problems, right? But the guy who's making the YouTube videos, by the way, cannot solve your life problems. Where's he going to go when he has a question about a hadith or about the interpretation of an ayah? Where am I going to go, right? So I have a very short list, and part of people like Dr. Akram, right? Dr. Akram Nadwi, may Allah protect him, spending decades and decades at Oxford University in the faculty. And then on top of that, being one of the leading muhaddithin in the world, being exposed to the top Western criticism on Islam, and then being one of at the forefront of our traditional sciences. Those kinds of people they may not be like prolific speakers, and they may not be like, have massive followings because they're not, putting social media of them riding a bicycle or something, like they're not doing that. But those people, for me, are like a lifeline. They're our lifeline. And for a lot of times when, and you guys, mashallah, many of you have background in Islamic studies. Our community, the bar is so low. If you can just drop a little bit of Arabic and you sound kind of normal when you're leading the prayer, then you're Shaykhul Islam and, I have a problem with this, or this, or I have a doubt, or
that's why this podcast, we get fatwa questions and we answer them.
Good.
We have no shame. Mahin answers all of them.
Yeah. Somebody asked me while I was teaching Arabic today in the comment section. They said, "What if the vaccine is made mandatory? What shall we do?" And I said, "Study Arabic." What do you want me to say, bro?
Yeah, no, but that's one thing I always appreciated about you is that a lot of people when they start something, and they end up talking about areas that they're not knowledgeable in. I've seen it happen so many times, and I love that you just you stick to Arabic, and that's something unique that I think, and not to just praise you, but I think a lot of people, whether it's YouTubers or people who make refutations, whatever, they end up like feeling they have to wear multiple hats when in fact they don't have to. But I feel like, maybe it might be well intended, but I think that track-minded focus that you have on just Arabic, at least outward to the public, and not engaging in issuing fatwas and I think it's important.
To me, Arabic is a means to Quran studies, and Quran studies is something I do openly engage in. But even that, I have my own path. So if I'm engaged in the study of a surah and it'll take me a couple of years, I'll stay on that surah. I don't need to worry about anything else. That's my focus. And when I'm giving durus on it and somebody chimes in and says, please tell us what to do with France, or, should we boycott products or whatever else. I was like, there's plenty of people having that discourse, and me saying something or not saying something will not change the narrative at all. However, what I am focused on, what I do believe will have long-term benefit for myself and for you, that I can actually I know I can make a positive contribution in, I will do. And this assumption that anybody who's engaged in any teaching is somehow a leader, a thought leader on all things, or represents the ummah's interest in all matters, is silly, it's dangerous, it's immature, it's a lot of bad things, right? So let's put it in other terms. There are, me as a student of the Quran, and somebody might be listening to my lectures and even the evolution of my lectures over the years, and they've spent thousands of hours with me, right? And now today I have a political opinion about what's happening with the elections in the United States, or I have some thoughts about Imran Khan in Pakistan, or I have some thoughts about whoever, right? I'm entitled to my political opinions. Absolutely, I am. And I can defend them and engage in conversation about them. But it would be irresponsible of me to bring those into my teaching of the Quran or use that Bayina platform to talk about those opinions, because for the lay audience, they assume that my political opinion was formulated based on my study of Allah's book, which it was not. The basketball team I like more or less did not come from my tafsir studies, right? My political opinions did not necessarily get formulated by my study of Islam, right? But unfortunately, when we say that a person in a position to lead us in one area or is excelling in one area must now be the spokesperson for all things Islam, then sorry to say, we popify people. Yep. We do that. And when we do that, then we either need our public figures to be saints or devils. If they speak what we need them to speak, then they are saints. If they say one thing that we don't agree with, that they are officially devils. Right?
You know what? I'm going to tell you something. It's a joke that we had internally here, okay? I don't want to bring this up, but a lot of people were talking about stuff that happened with you in the past, but we made a joke about this and said, you know what? If this is something that shakes people, like half of the Desi community is going to leave Islam because heck, it's under fire. So, because they put people on pedestals. You know what I mean? Islam relies on people's, on scholarly figures. And, they forget that they're human beings. They're going to make mistakes. And if their mistakes doesn't mean Islam has mistakes. Unfortunately, people, they mix those two together.
It's more than that, though. It's not just idolizing people and putting them on a pedestal. I feel that this is an indication of the weakness of, the core self-identification of a Muslim, right? We call ourselves the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam. I'll share something Quranic with you. What that means is many things. And one of the things it means is, you represent a culture and a civilization all on your own as an individual. You are the people of Ibrahim who stood by himself, was an ummah by himself. He didn't need validation from somewhere else to stand on his own values. He didn't need somebody else to reinforce what he believes. He could stand against all of society, like Ashabul Kahf. He could stand against all of society because he knows what he believes. He doesn't need someone else to come and validate his belief. And we have started thinking the only time you can have firm footing is if you're a scholar, right? And unless you're a scholar, you can't have firm footing as a Muslim. That's absolutely incorrect. You can have firm faith, grounded values, and not know a lick of Arabic. And that can happen. You could have just taken Shahada yesterday, and you're the best Muslim among us who can stand their ground, right? So we've created certain false perceptions of what righteousness or leadership or integrity looks like or reliability looks like, and by doing so we've taken responsibility off of the individual. So we've empowered personalities, and we have basically weakened individuals. And one of the most powerful values of Islam is it empowers the individual. It actually enables it. A father can perform the nikah of his daughter. He doesn't need to go to an ordained whatever, right? Is that an empowerment? That's incredible that you can do that. You can lead your own, a passing member of your own family. You can lead your own family janazah prayer. You don't have to go to somebody in like in the Jewish tradition or the Christian tradition or the Hindu or the whatever traditions. We don't have that. We don't have people that are holier than us that need to do certain things that we can't do. We don't have that. But unfortunately, these kinds of reliances, like unless this person says something, we don't know what to do. We're all lost without you, kind of thing. No, the person that we were lost without is our beloved messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's done with. The rest of us are on equal,
Yeah.
So I wanted to chime on something. There's a type of mindset that we all find with somebody who specializes in Arabic and in the Quran. So if we just put that in one category for right now, Arabic and the Quran.
Okay.
All the other sciences of Islam are almost like on a need-be basis, right? If someone is troubled about finding out how to do something about the deen, then they go to somebody of fiqh, for instance, or if they want to study something, they go to this guy. But there's something very, very distinct about the Arabic language, which started making sense to me much, much later. One of my teachers, he told me, he said, if you want to have a study of the deen where you have no headaches and just pure love, alayka bil Quran, wa lughat al-Quran. So there's one thing that, it's incumbent upon you to specialize in that. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. There's been scholars in the past, all the way from the earlier generations, like At-Tahawi. The reason why he formed his text, which we now refer to as Aqeel Tahawiyya, is to get 130, basically what we refer to now as bullet points or tenets that everyone can agree upon, and that there won't be too much ikhtilaf. And it can be taught, the same concepts can be taught to somebody in an elementary level. And those same concepts can go all the way to a very elaborate advanced level, but it's something that everyone can agree upon. He wanted to make sure that because of the infighting that happens naturally and in Islamic history that happened, and it's going to continue to happen, right? Amongst people. Imam al-Nawawi, for instance, compiled 40-some hadith just for the ummah can agree upon these 40 hadith, and there's not too much difference of opinion that can occur, right? So what I'm saying is there's been scholars in the past and still in other sciences that will always try to formulate a book or a method to avoid all of the infighting that can possibly occur. But on the flip side now, you have something as far as Quran and Arabic. Just consider that for one subject for right now, right? Quran and Arabic, because they go hand in hand. All of the people who've made change in the past, whether contemporary or in the past, I should say, have all been people who've been promoting the Quran in the Arabic language, right? When I was in Egypt, I had a mystique of I chased this type of mystique of the Kulliyat al-Dawah, the faculty of Dawah, because I had friends that were in the faculty of Dawah, and I'm like, man, these guys are amazing. I love the way they promote the deen. I love their comparative. And then when I met the people of the faculty of the Arabic language, these guys are very different human beings. They're much, much different. which is what I understand, like what I'm getting at you is, but you see these individuals who are in the faculty of Sharia. I'll give you an example. You'll find the most confused people in the faculty of Sharia Islamiyah. Why? Is because one day they're studying a mas'ala and it seems so beautiful to them. And the next day they study something else, like, oh, wait, they start scratching their heads. And that it's like that for 4 years. It's like that easily for 4 years. We're constantly like confused. It's a beautiful type of confusion. It has to happen.
Yeah.
But you're there as a doctor for the ummah, not somebody who's primary as somebody who's Arabic and Quran. So I want you to imagine that there's a ship that we're on. The waves that are falling behind you are all other subjects in the Sharia. But Arabic and the Quran are leading all of that, because you have to be able to jump on that boat, and you have to be a person of Allah. The only way you can do that was the Arabic language. All the other masail that come and all the other subjects that are studied are subcategories of the Arabic language in the Quran, right? So what I'm getting at is somebody who specializes. When I understood what my teacher was saying is somebody who focuses on the Arabic language in the Quran, they're going to be very satisfied. They're going to be very quenched, and they're not going to have to worry about being confused as much as other people are going to be confused. And that's what brings us to you as an individual. What I saw, mashallah, from when I first saw you come on the scene and even now, is that you can have your own, like you were saying, your own personal opinions and your political opinions, whatever the case is. But when you're teaching a class now, everybody's there from all backgrounds. They don't care. They have to have a portion of it, right? And me and Mort were talking about this in the past. Maybe he doesn't want to talk about it, but I personally believed, right, without praising you too much to your face, because some people feel uncomfortable with that. I personally believe that you revolutionized the Arabic language in our times. I personally believe that all the tools of tafsir are with you, right? MashaAllah, tabarakallah. And I personally believe no matter what background people come from, the system that you formulated, because it has to do with the Quran and the Arabic language, they're always going to have to jump on that ship. No matter even if they have personal vendettas against you in your thought of political discourse, whatever the case is, because the Arabic language is the root, and the Quran is the root of everything that you're doing. They don't have any other choice but to jump on ship, right? And what that's going to do is that's going to expand their horizons of the Quran, of the Arabic language. So that's one thing that, just for our listeners to understand, is that the mindset of somebody who specializes just in the Quran, the Arabic language, their mind is completely different, is differently wired than everybody else. Is that, like you said, I listened to the Hamza Yusuf. I used to listen to, I used to go to the masjids of the Madkhalis. I used to do this. You'll realize that since the Quran is the base, groups don't matter to you. You can benefit from all of them because your base is the Quran. Yeah. That's not going to wither away with anything. And one more thing is, more, as you said something about the qira'at, right? One thing that people have to understand as far as, trying to cast doubts on something. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, right? This word rayb, which is alluded usually to something that's doubtful, something that makes you feel uncomfortable inside of your chest, of something that you may even see in front of you, right? But there's still some type of discomfort. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the Quran and that there's no doubt in it, obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the truth and he means what he says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But people are always going to try to criticize whatever they can, whether they're non-Muslims or people who claim that they're Muslims, and people who were even from amongst the munafiqun, amongst the Sahaba, and people who seep through the ranks of Rasulullah, right? That were there. They're always going to have this attempt to try to cast doubts in the Quran itself, because if you were to cast doubts in that, then everything falls apart. And that's what happens generally. I don't know if you guys want to if we should even get into that thing of the qira'at and all that, but that attempt has been made not just in our time, but all the way from the past, right? Of even from the generation of the scholars of qira'ah, right? And they're never going to be able to cast doubt on the Quran. If we're, because we're always going to have people in this ummah that are specializing in the Quran and telling us how to look at the Quran. and their fiqh opinions don't even matter because their understanding of the Quran overshadows everything, right? So the mindset is, and I'm just going to tell you, and just generally what I think Ustad Nouman Ali Khan is also saying, is that if you want to have a carefree life and not worry about all these other confusing issues, alayka bil Quran. You just have to dig deep into the Quran. You have to dig deep into the Arabic language. Not the Arabic language where it's like, I'm just studying grammatical rules. It's much more than that, right? And that's the next point, if I made, that, Ustad, there's lots of people who want to get into the Quran, but like, dude, I got to get into the Arabic language, right? So what I felt that you did was you made not only the Arabic language palatable, but you made it something fun. And that was something that was missing for a long time, right? So can you just shed for 2 minutes or 3 minutes of what do you say to that individual that loves the Quran? They read it, they listen to tafsirs, but like, man, I got to learn Arabic if I really want to, and I just can't do it. But they have the capability inside of them because they spend hundreds of hours doing something else, and they become amazing in it in probably 100 hours. But when it comes to the Arabic language, they'll not roll their eyes in a condescending way, but they roll their eyes because they're like, dude, that's a project on its own.
Sim and I are examples of this, by the way. We've taken all these courses and we don't know anything.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Too many times. Now I'm watching Ninja Turtles in Arabic. It's true.
That will not help you. That will not help you.
Cowabunga, dude.
So, on that note, I think that people that feel demoralized that they cannot learn Arabic are justified on a number of fronts. One, Arabic classes are so boring. Like, if you have trouble falling asleep, sign up for an Arabic class. And then on top of that, the problem, and I wanted to revolutionize how Arabic was taught even to children, right? So I consulted Islamic schools, maybe about 70, 80 of them I traveled to and met with teachers, etc. Right? And when I would have conversations with, about the Arabic curriculum, just from the way they would speak to me, I would know that these children are, بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلُوا, so the problem is we have imported curricula that were either being used in the madrasa in South Asia, or we've imported curricula that are being used in the mahad in Egypt somewhere, or the Medina books, the Medina series, right? Or Al-Arabiyyatu Bayna Yadayk, or the terrible Georgetown textbook, or Muallim al-Insha, Arbika Muallim, etc., etc. We got these books, and then we're like, chalo ji, I learned it this way, now I'm going to teach you that. Chalo, shuru ho jao ji, nasara, nasaru, nasara. What's going on? And then the other side is Hada Dikun, and Hada, what are we going to do with Hada Dikun, bro? So
and they're pronouncing it the wrong way the whole time anyway.
Yeah. So what was crazy was, to me, from when someone says, man, Arabic is too hard, it's because, pardon the language, our way of teaching Arabic sucks. It's so bad. It's so bad. Yeah. And it has no goal in mind. There's no milestones. There's no motivation. There's no, hey, you did 3 hours of Arabic study. What did you accomplish? Oh no. But we finished book 1. What does that mean, you finished book 1? Can you tell me what that means? What does book 1 mean? No, I'd rather not talk about it now that it's over with. It's a traumatic memory. So the first thing was clear milestones. You have to have clear, okay, after 40 hours of Arabic study, what will you know? After 60 hours, what will you know? After 100 hours, what will you know? Exactly.
And then read Milestones by Sayyid Qutb.
And go to jail.
Depending on the country. Okay, so and then beyond that was just teaching method. It's not just about Arabic teaching, it's teaching itself. If you cannot be interesting as a teacher, if you cannot entertain, literally, teaching is theater. Well, I was very fortunate. I was a chaplain at a university, Adelphi University, for like a year in New York, in Long Island. right? This is a super rich school. They have like 8 Muslim kids that are all foreign students that pay $50,000 a year tuition because their dad's a minister somewhere in some corrupt country, etc. And they want a chaplain for themselves because they don't have time to go to Jumu'ah, right? So that's what it was. So but it was a great setup because I had the opportunity to take free classes at Adelphi University. Which
so basically you were a chaplain for the kids of dictators, pretty much.
Yeah, I was.
You better give us a fatwa, we're going to kill you.
And by the way, I had my job. This is 4 of these guys, 4 guys, 3 girls. And these 4 guys, I had to wake them up for Jummah.
Wow.
I had to call them.
I know they come from the Khalij. I know they did, for sure.
And one of these guys was awake one time. He's like, I'm almost at my save point right now. And
it's like convenient Islam, huh?
The point I was going to make was one of the coolest things that happened in that year, it taught me a lot, was I got to take whatever courses I wanted at Adelphi University. You can audit whatever you want if you're part of the administration, right? So I took a course of all things on preschool education, master's level preschool education course. All the people in the class were certified teachers already, and they've been teaching preschool for a while, and they're furthering themselves, right? Mm-hmm. I kid you not, our professor walks in day 1 of class, old lady, must have been 65 years old. I kid you not, jumps up on the table, slams her book on the ground, and says, once upon a time, there was a lion. And we're all like, what just happened? And then she starts the class and says, look, if you cannot immerse your students into the story, then you're in the wrong line of work. You have to become the lion. You have to become the mouse. Now you do it. Now we had to become the lion in the classroom. This is a master's level education class, right? They're not studying education theory. They're studying how do you control the emotional atmosphere of a classroom. Not just the intellect, not just the material you're going to teach, not just syllabus preparation. How do you engage somebody? How do you keep them interested, motivated, excited, wanting to come back for the next class? Can you imagine what kind of psychotic experience it would have to be for someone to study Arabic grammar for 3 hours and say, I can't wait till next class? That doesn't sound normal. That became my mission. How do I make someone crazy about coming back the next day?
Wow.
Like excited,
what year was this, by the way, Ustad?
2005.
So you were already thinking along the lines of, because I think this kind of gets in. I was interested in understanding, maybe you can get into this, as knowing Arabic, knowing how to teach is one thing. And then how do you brand? How do you do the marketing behind it? How do people become aware of your ability to teach?
You know, we put the cart before the horse when it comes to that stuff. All of this stuff is fluff, man. Where are you going to produce your YouTube videos? How are you going to make Facebook ads? What kind of ad graphics you can add? Where are you going to get your logo made? All this is nonsense.
Yeah,
you just got to do it. You just got to put your
Ustad,
just do it.
You don't know how many times I help a lot of people who are interested in podcasting, creating YouTube videos. I'm like, you're asking the wrong questions about.
Mic should I get? Stop.
Yeah, about marketing and technical things. That is nothing. Some people just think of like, oh, well, I'm going to do what the Mamluks do, get a few of my friends together, and we're going to. It's not about that. It's so much more. You got to be a presenter. You got to be able to pull people in to your world and present it to them.
I'll even disagree with that. I'll go even a step further. You first of all, you have to be in love with and passionate about what you're doing. I don't care if there's one person in front of you or 1 million people in front of you. When you have genuine passion and you bring everything to the table, and when you present in that way, right? If you made the world's best cake and only one person ate it, then that guy is your ambassador for life. Yeah. Whenever he talks about cake, he says, go eat this guy's cake, man. That was a cake. How is it going to grow? Not from clicks and ads. An institutions don't come first. A service comes first. And when a service is something that someone experienced the service and they became an ambassador of it, they said, man, that was incredible. I can't wait to have more of it. And I can't wait to tell my friends and family about it. I didn't even have to go and tell them, hey, by the way, spread the word, please. Here's a flyer. Take it to your uncle. No, you are my flyer now if I did my job.
Yeah.
And when you do that, then you don't have to worry about how do you grow your brand. Honest to God, I knew web design, I knew graphics design. I was a designer first. I was in the graphics design field. I was a design director at a firm. So when I put my website together and all that stuff, nobody was viewing my website. What are you talking about? Nobody. I had Google AdWords, all that stuff. Even back in the day, I had search engine setups, meta tags, all of it. That none of that helped. You know what? And I wasn't even focused on that. I teach a class in New York, and somebody has a cousin in New Jersey and says, "Man, I know somebody in Jersey. They want you to come teach there." I go to Jersey, somebody's in Louisiana. "Hey, I have an uncle in Louisiana. They want you to come there." I went to 50 communities across the United States without running a single ad, without one ad.
Wow. Just organic growth.
Without even asking for a recommendation. People would come up to me and say, "Hey, I know someone who would like to have this course in their community in some no-name town in California somewhere. How did they get in touch with you?" "Hey, just give them my email address. It's okay." That's what it was. But the issue at hand is, how do you grow a brand? You grow your service. You excel in a service. Once that happens, everything else starts falling into place.
And I think it's so interesting because in the old school method, it's like you don't question the method. It's just like you just sit down and learn, right? But I think one thing we've benefited being here in this part of the world is that it's service based. If people are not happy and they're not satisfied, you're not going to get anywhere. And I think that, and I was just telling, Sim and Mahin, these guys on another show before we got started, I'm like, bro, yeah, Knack was on a live stream at like 10 o'clock at night, and it was like there were like I think like 1,000 people that were watching like for 3 hours in Arabic. It's unheard of. Like, I mean, we could be live streaming right now and we get 100 people for for 3 hours. After a while, you start seeing it decline, like drop down. And the fact that someone could be teaching a class for 3 hours long, and you have 2 kids with you, by the way, like just sitting there hanging out, 2 kids, right, and teaching them Arabic, which is yeah, the learning, right? Exactly. I saw a part of it, and I'm like, they're engaged, and their engagement is making other people engage, and the chat is going wild. And 3 hours later, there's more people in the chat. They don't want it to end. They're like, no, don't end the live stream. Continue. Like, that kind of engagement is amazing to me. That energy is what I feel like lacked in a lot of traditional. Like, we all went to like traditional. I think you grew up in Long Island, so that the Sunday school, right? You had the typical uncle, auntie that came in and taught you the stories of the prophet from that little colored green book they had. You know what I mean? And like, oh God, this stuff again, right?
Bro,
I mean, but
if I tell about my Sunday school story, you're gonna cry, dude.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's all of us.
I want to laugh.
Dude, hear it.
So check this out. True story. Sunday school, there was like a 16-year-old girl teaching it when I was probably like 7 or 8 years old. But I still remember the story perfectly. She literally opened the Quran. It was a translation, Pickthall's translation. I still remember.
Marmaduke?
Yeah, Marmaduke Pickthall. That's the one.
I love that name.
And it was kind of a gloomy day too, to be honest with you. It was like kind of rainy outside. And she's like, okay, look at this book. This is the Quran. She's teaching us what the Quran is, right? It's like, this is the Quran. One side is English, one side. And she's like, okay, let's pass it around. You know how you show and tell you pass it around? So we're passing around the Quran. We're like, oh, so it's on Surah Al-Baqarah, right? And it says the cow. Wallahi, dude, this is a true story, dude. It says the cow. One kid says, oh, teacher, I still actually remember her name, but I'm not going to say it. It's like, why is this called the cow? And she's like, well, it's a story about a cow. And this cow, you remember like that story, like Land Before Time or whatever, like so in the cow actually gets lost. It gets separated from its family, and the cow actually goes through this whole entire mission of trying to find his parents and meets these other animals along the way that are helping it. And at the end, it sees its mother and father from a far distance, and they run towards each other. It's like, we were looking for you too. And they have a big hug, and it finishes. For about 3 years, that's what I thought Surah Al-Baqarah was about, bro.
Hey, well, you're a sheikh now, so she deserves some credit, Amir.
True story, dude.
And I think like that's part of the problem. Like, and I was telling you guys that kind of engagement is what it's not only about the Arabic language, but in general, like Muslim content that we create. Like, it's so, most of it, I tell you, is lame. I'm sorry, people get, I get in trouble for saying stuff, but most comedy and entertainment, it's all just lame, cheesy. I mean, it's just horrible. It's just so unengaging. And I feel like that, and Muslims, the reason why they don't get engaged with it is because they're used to seeing other things on Netflix or YouTube, whatever, and it's more engaging for them. Like,
Oh,
I mean,
more. I think it's much more than that. I think there's a lack of creativity, and I think
well, I mean,
a lot of that's. I think we don't have the most intelligent people or the most creative people who are entering the religious spaces. I think what we have is people who are religious who just feel compelled to do something because no one else is doing it. And
just to comment on that, I think it's a mindset. It's not that they don't have creativity. Like I'm sure, Nak, you'd probably say you had to put the effort into actually making it like enjoyable. Like for example, that lady jumping on the table, right? I mean, there's those little things that you do to make your class more engaging. Maybe telling a joke.
The thing is, I'm actually that psychotic.
Yeah, the problem I can tell.
So you have to have a crazy in you to do certain things, to be able to engage your audience. You're not doing it for your audience. You're actually authentic. So, I've been in the speaker scene for a while, right? So I people see the guy coming up on stage, but many of you are also, the backstage stories too, right? So the behind the scenes, the speaker world, right? It's so fake, man. They're like,
it is so cheesy.
Where do you get your jokes, bro? Where do you get your jokes? Like, what? What is that? Where do I get my jokes?
Yeah. I mean, I get DMs like, bro, how do you prepare for a show? I'm like, I literally don't. I just jump on a live stream and I talk. Like people ask me, how do you know what to talk about the guests with? I said, well, it's just the art of having a conversation. Like you just talk to people, right? Some people are good at it, some are not. I get that. But I think what it is even the ones that are good at it, it's just been so like, I mean, imagine everything starts off like just so monotonous and so like just robotic. It's like I'm already dead by the time the khutbah, like the introduction of the khutbah al-hajah, that I'm done with it. I mean, like I'm just ready to turn the thing off. You know what I mean? Like in the beginning.
Yeah, and you've got the guys that like they want to give the khutbah and they want to make sure their audience is awake, so they give the khutbah as if they are the announcer for Judgment Day itself. Alhamdulillah, nahmaduh wa nasta'inuh wa nasta'inuh. Like, whoa, easy.
I've been saying this for a long time. I've been saying that exact same thing.
Like 2 seconds before the khutbah starts, they're so nice. They're like, Alhamdulillah, how are you? How's your family? And they're like, Alhamdulillah.
And they got the finger. They got the finger in your face. You know what I mean? Like, how dare you don't lift your index finger up at the same time? I mean, yeah.
But my thing
I mean,
is,
go ahead.
I want to tell you a sad story. I had a student of mine that shall not be named, who was just really all he wanted to do was teach. He just really wanted to become a teacher, right? And he's putting so much work into learning and studying, and he's like watching videos on like teaching techniques and reading books about it and all this stuff. And but ma khuliqa lit-tadris, like Allah did not make him to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Right? He's just not. He's a manager. He's a great, strategist, but he can't carry a classroom. He'll create massive comas inside the classroom. That's not what he was made for. So it's not just, I want to produce something because somebody else is doing it. A real self-assessment is, what is a unique talent, an ability, a heightened sense and intelligence that Allah has given me in some area that he didn't give somebody else to, or maybe he did. But if you don't actually have a valuation for yourself, and then people are so weak now that they say, no, you tell me what I'm good at. No, go look in the mirror. Go look at yourself. Like,
yeah.
You can't even now assess yourself. You need someone else to assess you. You can't tell what you're good at yourself. That's how helpless we are. We're not. So we have to get out of that mindset. And also, you can't be delusional that if XYZ did this, therefore I'm going to do this too. No, Allah didn't make you the same way. Maybe he did. Maybe you'll do a better job. But that's for you to determine. But you can't be blind about another and say, I'm doing everything they do, and yet I don't get any results. Yeah, but maybe you're not made to do that.
Yep. And I think that there's a distinction here between, if some people say confuse this with pride, but there's no problem with acknowledging that you're good at something and saying, hey, I'm good at this part. This is my forte. This is what I'm good at, and this is why I'm doing it. Not out of arrogance, but because you want to separate your uniqueness from, what you're good at, in front of everybody else, right? Because you've got to be able to separate yourself from the norm. In that particular field. Otherwise, why are you important? Why are you relevant?
Yeah, and
that's what it comes down to.
On that note, for my own work, one of the things that has evolved about my work is that now when I engage in Quran studies, for me, Quran studies is about, depending on the surah or its era of revelation, the subject matter, different subject matter in the Quran requires a different area of expertise. So the age in which we used to say that if you have your ulum al-Quran and ulum al-tafsir down packed, that therefore now you're ready to engage the Quran, that was a presupposition that was too simplistic. There are places in the Quran that require extensive research in a certain area, and other places in the Quran require extensive research in other areas. And many of those areas are not my area of expertise, right? So when I'm studying, for example, Surah Yusuf, which I was doing in the last year, there are lots of parallels with the biblical account of the study of in Genesis, the story of Joseph in Genesis. But I don't know biblical Hebrew, and I'm not going to read an English translation off of Google or on Bible.com and say, now I know how to compare the Quran to the Bible. I need to go to somebody who spent some years studying biblical Hebrew, and they can compare the equivalent biblical verses so we can see what the Quran is saying that contradicts or affirms what they're saying. So I pull in people that are experts in that field and give them their credit. And it takes nothing away from what I'm doing. I don't have to feel insecure that somebody's incredible at some area of work. Like, I don't have to own like the recognition for anything, but not even within the world of Quran studies. There are people that have remarkable expertise in things I can't even begin to touch. There are people that are experts in the qira'at, for example. There are people that are experts in tajweed, and they have the entire hierarchical map of all of the qira'at and all of the the great sub chains within the qira'at, and who's narrated from who, and how that variation works, and what's strong and what's not. They've got that entire map in their head. They could, spout it off the top of their head. I could never do that. That's not my area. There are people, as much as I love studying Arabic grammar and classical Arabic, there are people whose knowledge of Arabic poetry and Arabic idiom makes me feel like I'm a kindergartner, right? And I have no shame in accepting that and saying I need to learn from them, or I need to pull them in when I need to do some area of study and there's a piece of poetry that I'm not understanding. This is the age now when Islamic education needs to be about highlighting the contributions of others, right? Without taking anything away from you. That's not a diminishing of yourself. That I have to be the sheikh that knows it all. No, you don't. You're a learner just like others. And in fact, you set a really good example when you demonstrate that you're learning, instead of, no, I need to present myself as the top of all fields related to this subject, because otherwise how will I be number one? Who said you have to be number one at any? Where did the contest come from? Just do your best, excel, and part of excelling is actually collaborating.
There's been
Ustad, I have a question. Since you mentioned the biblical commentary, how do we deal with the issue when people in dawah get involved? So, for example, we did a podcast a couple of years ago where one of our guests had mentioned he's an expert in, we call a Muslim biblicist. And so there's an opinion that he brings out from the Quran that maybe he believes affirms the integrity of the Gospels, or he might affirm a certain narrative of the crucifixion that's not from the Quran itself. And it's an academic discussion. But then people in dawah get really upset about that. So how do we, and it seems like you're talking about, there's lots of different tafsirs that we can go with, but then sometimes in dawah, there's like a certain narrative that has to be pushed for the effectiveness of dawah. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. And, that's where, when you have issues like, for example, the resurrection of Jesus, for example, right, is not a small subject, even in tafsir studies. It's a very rich, complex, deep subject. And when I had done work on Ali Imran year before last, when we got to that portion, I have a WhatsApp group of a bunch of guys that are Quran studies people that I turn to, and we were all engrossed in that ayah, in that passage, for a while before I could talk about it, to understand all positions on the subject, where those positions emanated from. The thing with da'wah is that we are trying to superimpose one narrative over all other narratives, and even my personal convictions are actually in line with the mainstream view on, for example, that subject. But I decided before I was going to hold my view, to let go of my view and look at all views and explore all the work that's been done on this subject, all the arguments that have been made from all sides. And then even within our group, there were some that were actually of the opposing view. There were some people that are engrossed in Islamic scholarship that are of the view Jesus is not coming back. They're of that. I'm not of that view, but they are. And they have their reasons. I disagree with their reasons, but you know what? There needs to be, that's one of the beauties of Islam. If somebody holds a view, they substantiate their view with transparent arguments. And the transparency of their arguments is not, all the scholars said this. Homie, I don't even know what you mean by all the scholars because you can't even name 10 of them. Like, what do you mean all the scholars? Or I don't do this in public, but when some guys come up to me and say, Akhi, the Sahaba had ijma' on this issue, I was like, okay, name 25.
I think that concept of ijma' is also a little bit tricky too, and people make that claim that it's ijma'.
Right.
Like, so what is that? I mean, even the understanding of ijma' is a little bit different.
Black and white. In that way, we like things to be black and white, and some things are, and other things, here's the scholarship on it. A da'i should be able to say, here's the Muslim scholarship on this subject if you're interested, instead of saying, I'm going to give da'wah on a subject that is scholarly, that is scholarly, and I don't have the grasp.
Here's the problem, though. A lot of times when these discussions happen, and you know that there are a breadth of opinions on certain issues, like, for example, use the example of Jesus, whether he's coming back or not. People say, well, you can choose that opinion, but you're not part of Sunni Islam then. What do you think about that?
That's the thing. That's not my area to decide. That's who am I to decide who's part of Sunni Islam or not?
You have to decide.
I can say I disagree with this position. Here are my reasons. Now,
off the manhaj.
What label you choose for yourself is your business, not mine. That's none of my business. And what do I get, and what does the ummah get from me deciding whether or not you're Sunni?
Yeah.
What do we get from that?
Yeah. But I have a personal opinion about this. I feel like sometimes da'is, they try to go too much into biblical references and trying to push his narrative. I feel like just that message of tawheed in and of itself is where it should be focused on. I mean, like, I've heard people go into the book of Isaiah and say, oh, the Prophet Muhammad is mentioned here and there, and they begin to interpret other people's scriptures. And I always feel like on the other end that I don't do that because I feel like I would be totally pissed off if somebody was interpreting the Quran the way they wanted to. Right? And just say, okay, well, it says that, Jesus is God because there's three in Trinity in the Quran. There's the angel Jibreel, there's Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's Allah, so there's a Trinity. So you guys are all, I would lose my mind. Like, what are you talking about? Like, this is stupid, right? So I think that Muslims try to just essentially do this too much, where the focus of the Quran is to appeal to their intellect and try to call them to something that is common between us, right? And let them know, we don't worship, we have one God. The common things that will call them with common sense from the Quran, right? Not like trying to make these deep discussions about the different fiqh opinions about what the interpretation of Jesus could have been, or what is the entire gospel today or not. I mean, these things to me are side elements. They're really not really important.
They're different audiences, in my opinion. They're very different audiences. There are people that generally want to hear what Islam is about in a very simple way. Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal maw'izati al hasana, right? So there's people of maw'izah hasana, and you don't have to get into deep dives with them at all. Actually, a series that I was working on, the series that I'm working on is called A Deeper Look. So I spend a lot of time on a single ayah. That's what I try and do. And if it does have a parallel with the biblical tradition, like the story of Joseph is so fundamental to the biblical tradition, what I try to highlight is how the Quran is different from the biblical tradition, not proving the Quran and disproving the Bible. What's the comparison and the contrast, right? And what's remarkable, what's been an incredible experience with that, there have been pastors, people that are devout Christians, Jews, that have been listening in on these lectures with keen interest, actually even Western academics, and are taking note from what we're doing, what Suhaib and I are doing in this area, along with Saqib, because this was not done before, and it's not being done for polemic reasons to say, hey, here's the truth in Islam. By the way, in the course of that exploration, some people are realizing that the Quran is worth a deeper look, and they shouldn't dismiss it as the word of the devil. And they're realizing it has profound spiritual truth in it, and now they're considering exploring it deeper. And whether Allah opens the door to guidance for them or not, that's up to Allah Azza wa Jal, right? But there is an audience for that deeper level discussion. But even that discussion, in my opinion, should not be about beating somebody down using their book.
I agree with you 100%.
I don't think that's the approach. Personally, I don't think that's effective. I don't think it's genuine.
I think so.
Right.
distinction being brought up. I mean, when you're talking to somebody in da'wah in general, I think that some people try to increase their toolkit to such a level, they just want to have like a bazooka. They think that all these rare issues and opinions is going to work in their interest. Yeah, and it becomes very problematic. It's a very simple message.
And I think what we're talking about is essentially that, you know what, we feel like you have to tear down the Bible and the other books in order to make the Quran look superior. And we don't have to do that. The Quran is superior.
This reminds me of an ayah. So we keep saying people of da'wah, but the idea of debate is jidal, not da'wah. Right? And the ayah says, Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal maw'izati al-hasana. And then it separates the next amr, jadilhum billati hiya ahsan. Now, first of all, there's a distinction made between da'wah and argumentation. And even when it came to argumentation, what did Allah say? Jadilhum billati hiya ahsan. Debate them with that which is better, which is interesting because that which is better, according to many classical positions, even the Athari, the earliest traditions, al-ahsan huna al-Quran. Jadilhum bil-Quran. Right? So argue back with them with a way that is more beautiful. The more beautiful is what Allah has revealed. So bring the argument back to Allah's word. Not to highlight the flaw in what you have, but to highlight the beauty in what we have.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Right. So let me ask you a question, though.
The Quran is not enough, man. Sometimes we think that you have to have an intellectual stance regarding the Quran, and sometimes just reciting the Quran to them. You know, I used to have an imam in our masjid, you know, Hafiz Habibur Rahman, when the non-Muslims used to come in the back, he used to Qul huwallahu ahad, he used to read it with a certain type of force. And he was like, our job is just to read the Quran to them, translate Qul huwallahu ahad to them, and say it with the way it's supposed to be given to them. And don't be afraid of that's not enough, right? That's up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah, I think that's important because sometimes we try to take away from just the barakah of the Quran itself, like just the fact that hearing the Quran in itself is shifa for people, like just hearing it, right? But let me ask you this though. What do you, and this has always been a huge thing, even growing up, like, you know, you always get these people that say, like, they almost try to make the Quran like a science book. And like there's definitive science in the Quran. I'm sure you've come across those people like, oh, you know, it talks, and they will sometimes bring in some new phenomena that's happening today and tie that into the Quran. There he goes.
Come back.
Yeah, I mean,
where you going?
Yeah, no, because he knows where I'm going with this. And I feel like sometimes, I'm not saying that it happens where people prematurely jump the gun and they'll say, aha, this new research came out, this was told in the Quran 1400 years ago, and they jump the gun, and it ends up being where like they shoot themselves in the foot. And for me, I feel like, how do you feel about that? Like as far as relating science and the Quran and just regular da'is using this stuff to propagate Islam to non-Muslims?
So, okay, so you can think of the incredible truth of the Quran in two ways. The Quran is a world in and of itself. So it's got its own world inside it, and then it interacts with the outside world, right? So when you're saying that, or anybody's saying that we found scientific phenomenon that tallies with the narrative of the Quran, they're trying to connect the outside world with the inside world of the Quran, right? The problem with the outside world and what we learn of it is a constantly emerging world of knowledge. So what was hard scientific fact 100 years ago is now disproven theory, right? And so science emerges. You know, medicine is emerging. Physics is evolving, chemistry is evolving. These worlds of science, are, especially astronomy, is evolving. Our understanding of space is evolving, and evolving very quickly, in fact. Then pegging something in the Quran to an emerging theory, or to not even a developed, but an emerging theory or developing theory, and then to discover later that that theory didn't pan out. Obviously, the problem with that is, like you called it, shooting yourself in the foot, because you took something transient, something that is in flux, and you pegged it to something that's a constant, which is the Quran, right?
Yeah.
And so if that fell apart, then now because you pegged it to the Quran, now you discredited the Quran in some way, ma'adallah, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Exactly.
the example of this is the idea of what Adam al-Islam and his nature was, what form of human or hominid he was, or, you know, all the discussions related to evolutionary biology,
Right.
that people are transposing onto the original human. And I'm like, you know what, these could be fun discussions to have, and it could be, you know, possibilities that you may want to explore, but to write a paper saying that this is why I think this is when, because so much of these sciences are so nascent in it's only been maybe over a little over 100 years old, where they've really started finding a lot of these bone structures and all the different forms of hominids that have transpired over hundreds of thousands of years, that you can't really make any solid
So to me, when it came to because this when in the 90s growing up, when I came into kind of being exposed to Islamic material, it was an interesting story. I was an MSA in a college in New York. They put together a brochure, and they actually they got a brochure from a dawah organization that shall not be named, and had scientific miracles of the Quran, glossy print, nice little embryology, astronomy, you name it. Here's why the Quran is the word of God. And they distributed over 1,000 of them to college students across different colleges. And I got invited to one community college, and the philosophy department kids, right? The philosophy department kids got a hold of that brochure and decided to make a pamphlet of their own responding to the Muslim Students Association's Scientific Miracles in the Quran brochure. And they took the ayat that the Muslim students had used, and they provided proper etymology, the root analysis of the words and what it means, and showed how unscientific the language of the Quran was. And at the end, welcomed a response from the Muslim students. We welcome a response from you for an intellectually honest conversation, because we feel what you presented in your brochure was intellectually dishonest, right? It was a respectfully written smackdown from a bunch of atheist kids that were 19, 20 years old, that did a little bit of research, but their little bit of research dwarfed what the Muslim kids will ever do, right?
Yeah.
And I'm reading like, this guy knows what a jizr is and what the is. And he knows what? How does he? Yeah. What? And they typed it up in Arabic in the 90s. That's a lot of work. And they said,
that's impressive.
And we don't have the money to print this in glossy print. So this is a black and white photocopy, but you're welcome to read it. And we welcome an intellectual response. You know what? You don't step your foot into something you're not ready for, right? What I was going to say, the internal world and the external world, for me, this conversation was pegged on what? The Quran is miraculous. It's divine. And how will we show its divine essence in the scientific age? By pegging it to science, right? So that was a kind of a logical step for a lot of people, right? For me, the study of the i'jaz of the Quran, what I personally consider overpowering acknowledgement of the Quran being divine, is actually its internal world. And the internal world of the Quran, whether you study the Quran in the 5th century or the 12th century, or you're studying it now, or you're studying it 7 centuries from now, its internal world is unchanged regardless of the dynamics that change outside.
Yeah.
So its language, its cohesion, it's the way it presents its narrative. There are multiple dimensions of this that, to me, make it timelessly divine. And the external efforts to establish its divinity, some of those efforts may actually pan out. It's possible. It's possible that there are some scientific theories that tally up with the exact language of the Quran, and those scientific theories turn out to be true. That is absolutely possible, right? But then you run into a next problem. And here's the next problem. If you line up a scientific phenomenon with the Quran, then you have spoken to somebody with a scientific mind, and basically what you've told them is the Quran speaks in scientific terms.
Yep.
Right? Once they say, fine, you say Quran lines up with science, therefore Quran speaks in scientific terms. Good enough. Now, when we get to Surah Al-Kahf and the sun is setting in muddy water, right? So, تغرب في حمية. You guys believe the sun drowns in... No, that's a literary expression. When you look at the sun drowning, if you're at the Pacific Ocean in California and you're looking at the sun drowning into the ocean, you would call it the sun drowning in the ocean, even though scientifically you know that the sun is not drowning in the ocean. It's a literary expression for what the human eye sees, right?
Right.
So it's not speaking in scientific terms, it's speaking in literary terms. But wait a second, you just said the Quran is scientific.
Yeah.
Yep.
You can't have it both ways. So
can I just make
that's what I'm getting to. Like, where they're saying they're trying to find, like, they're trying to peg like definitive science. And the way I look at it, as I tell people, is that there are certain scientific mentions in the Quran, but but it's not a book of science. It's not going to go into details about. I mean, we're not opening the Quran to learn about biology and chemistry.
Expects us to explore ayat. That's it. He expects us to explore the world, and even the origins of species is something the Muslims should be encouraged to explore. قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ ثُمَّ انظُرُوا كَيْفَ بَدَأَ الْخَلْقِ.
Yeah.
Allah says it. He says, go look how creation began. Go find out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah, more just give me one second. Let's make one quick clarification. So there's maybe some people that are jumping to conclusions and saying that we're saying that the Quran is not dependable for science. Number one, that's not what we're saying. We're not saying that the Quran doesn't contain scientific issues. Of course it does. What we are saying is the purpose of the Quran is not science. That's the first thing. It's not a science book. It contains elements, but the original miracle, we have to, that's why I think it's an amazing thing that we're bringing also all this back to the Arabic language, right? The purpose of the Quran and all the contents that it has are a bonus, are part of the package deal that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoiled us with, right? On a communication level, the purpose of the Quran is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do we get acquainted with Allah? What has He given me about Himself so I know what my purpose is? That's the first thing. On a linguistic level, the miracle of the Quran lies in its language, not in the contents of the Quran, even though that's miraculous on its own and it has its own miracles. And Ustad, I love the breakdown that you gave as far as the internal environment, the external environment. And I don't think it would have been said in any better way. That was a profound way of putting it. But as far as that internal environment of the Quran is, there's nothing like it, number one. Why? Because the miracle itself is in the linguistic structure of the Quran. That is what the Quran is, and that's what it came to challenge human beings, right? Two, it came to challenge human beings. There's even a definition for, a Quran. There's many different definitions, right? But from amongst the definitions are that it is the speech of Allah, right? Kalam Allah, ghayru makhluq, is uncreated, right? Revealed to Muhammad ﷺ by Jibreel alayhi salam, by way of Allah to Jibreel alayhi salam being the middle person to Muhammad ﷺ, preserved in the mushafs, by mutawatir transmit, which is we could speak probably hours about how and the wisdom and all that. The next portion is the beautiful part, is a challenge to mankind to produce something like it. That's like amongst the definition of what the Quran actually is. It's a challenge to mankind to produce something like it, meaning the linguistic structure of the Quran, right? And reading it is an act of worship, meaning whether you understand it or you don't understand it, reading it itself is an act of worship. As in difference to hadith. The hadith are an act of worship at the level of seeking to know Muhammad ﷺ, seeking knowledge, what Muhammad ﷺ tells us to do, but reading every letter of the hadith is you're not getting a hasanah for it like you're getting for the Quran, right? But the Quran, all the contents that it has in it, obviously is very, very trustworthy because it's from Allah. But we're not going to say, since there's science in the Quran, we're going to use it as a complete source of science. The Quran never made that claim, and the Quran is never going to make that claim. The Quran is going to give you everything that you need to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no matter what the world does, right? And I'm just to add to what you were saying about science, it's very, very true. Science is always evolving, it's always changing. So when you go to a bunch of people, you bring the Quran, the people of science have their own paradigm of what they're going to function through, what is true science is what is not true science. The Quran is not going to do that. The Quran has its own, like Ustad said, it has its own environment, makes its own principles of what it's supposed to be based off of. We're not going to use outside sources, which now we'll call science, and put the Quran in that environment and then test it with their paradigm. The Quran never told us to make that claim.
It is an interesting subject matter. The Quran does deal, you're right, with scientific phenomenon. And if the Muslims are to engage in the Quran's engagement with science, right? Like the Quran engages in several things. The Quran engages, for example, with Egyptian history, which is a deep subject. The Quran engages with biblical history, Christian history, and Jewish history. The Quran similarly engages in geological phenomenon sometimes, or astronomical phenomenon sometimes. It does. or even the embryological phenomena. It does. It talks about those things in a certain context. My argument is that people that speak of these things and peg them to the Quran better be at the top levels of scholarship in two worlds. They better be the leading biologist in their university and tenured as a professor, and they better have studied tafsir and Arabic and Quranic studies at a very scholarly level, because they are taking something from the world of a high science and another high science, and they're trying to make a connection between them. And if that connection was made as a result of a couple of Google searches, then they should just find a different hobby. Right? Because we're engaged in a conversation often created by people that don't represent the credentials in one or the other. Right? And if they have it in one, they don't have it in the other. Right? And that's why I say maybe you can't have that. Then maybe you need to have a collaborative environment, an environment in which there are a number of scientists and a number of high leading Quran studies intellectuals before you can make such a parallel. So I'm not saying the parallel can't exist, but the quality of the labor that needs to go in before you draw such a parallel, let's meet those prerequisites first before we print a glossy brochure.
Yeah. No, and I think you answered what I was trying to get at, and I feel like that's perfect. I think that Muslims should have, like, within their own circle, like, have very high level, mufassir of the Quran that can take an interpretation and present it to high level scientists who are Muslims and say, hey, if I were to present this argument, is this factually correct scientifically? Would this make sense? Are there any challenges to this? And I think that conversation, if you can marry those two concepts after that conversation, then I think you have a solid argument to make and say, hey, the Quran foretold this 1400 years ago, right? But before having that conversation, it's very risky. And I think it does a disservice. Right. Yeah.
It is a disservice.
So now, as we wrap up this show, I want to kind of talk a little bit about some of the more socio-political elements that are happening in the Western world, where we're having, a loud and vociferous, some will argue they're a minority among society, but a group of people who are, interjecting identity politics into our religious and Muslim spaces, and where they're kind of interjecting their own version or identity into the Quran and seeking representation within the Quran from whether it's your ethnicity or your gender or various intersections within society are seeking representation. See the Quran here; it's talking about women in this manner, and this is how they're kind of forming some kind of relationship with a certain ayah or thing. And I think it's a dangerous phenomenon because it's not taking in to play any other aspect of the human being. It's only taking certain segments of what it is to be human and transposing whatever the social discussion that's happening in the world and projecting it onto the Quran and or trying to find some kind of agreement with the Quran, or maybe disagreement.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take a step back from this. Let's understand something. Or at least I'll present to you what I understand of the subject. You see, the Quran can be used to prove virtually anything. I can prove to you that the Quran wants, Quran declares that women are inferior to men, and I can give you 50 evidences and prove that. Then I can prove that women are superior to men and use Quran to make that argument. The problem is, once you have a conclusion, and then you want to furnish evidences for your conclusion, you can certainly do so. And the Quran literally opened the door for it when Allah said, يُضِلُّ بِهِ كَثِيرًا. He misguides by the Quran itself many. What's the purpose? When does misguidance happen? When someone says, I will not surrender to the conclusions that I will reach. As I said before, I will not come to conclusions after I contemplate the word of Allah. No, I already have my conclusion. Now I shall draw from the word of Allah what will service my conclusion. So now I'm not at the service of the word of Allah. The word of Allah is in service of me. Right? This whether this is done to make someone feel like their group is mentioned in the Quran or acknowledged in the Quran, whether this is done to draw a conclusion that puts somebody in a political advantage, whether this is done to further the agenda of a particular cult, the thought process is exactly the same. The thought process of those who say, for example, somebody who says there's a messenger after Muhammad will also pull evidences from the Quran, right? The thought process of those who say there is no life in the after death, in the grave, there is no barzakh, etc., will pull evidences from the Quran. The person who will say we don't have to follow hadith at all will also pull evidences from the Quran. It doesn't matter what idea it is. The problem is you have an idea, and now you want to furnish or pick a place that you feel convenient for your narrative and use that to make the argument for or against. Now the issue with that is this process, not the conclusion. Human beings can genuinely try to learn something and come to the wrong conclusion. That's not offensive. But the idea of tearing the Quran to pieces and taking something and leaving other things out is basically something Allah has talked about a number of places in the Quran, like أَفَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضِ الَّذِينَ جَعَلُوا الْقُرْآنَ عِضِينَ. Those who took the Quran and tore it to pieces, right? And then looking at the whole, it's remarkable that the ayah of contemplating the Quran uses the word Quran. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ both times. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Why? Because in order for us to contemplate an ayah, we cannot see it in isolation with the narrative of the entire Quran and come up with a conclusion in this ayah that contradicts the rest of the Quran. So tadabbur in the Quran is a holistic thing. It's at the level of an ayah, liyadabbaru ayatihi, but it's a holistic thing also at the same time. When these timeless principles are abandoned, then you will get these kinds of conclusions. And I disagree with you respectfully. I don't think it's dangerous. I think it's funny. Because this جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا. The Quran has the ability, more than any human being and any defense mechanism, the Quran defends itself. And the test of time will prove that any false narratives attributed to the Quran will be like sand being smashed against the walls of a castle. That's all it's going to be. I don't have to get worked up about theories that are emerging about the Quran.
Exactly.
Not at all. Like none of it irks me. None of it bothers me. None of it, like, I need to respond to it. I'm like, and I'm going to keep that.
Is it something that you're trying to integrate, though, in Bayina or in your students, whoever you're meeting? That the whole way, this modality of how you're seeking representation with a certain aspect of your identity in the Quran and trying to, justify your own existence in whatever way.
That's not what I talk about. What I talk about is kalimatullahi hiya al-ulya. My issue is, guys, one thing I read from Hamiduddin Farahi is so beautiful. It's like my number one principle in thinking about the Quran, the role of the Quran, in understanding life, in understanding all things. One of the names of the Quran in the Quran is an-nur. فَآمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَالنُّورِ الَّذِي أَنزَلْنَا. Yeah? Now, light is something that is shed on all things, right? But light is what helps you see. Light is not what is seen. You don't shed light on light. Light sheds itself on all things. So what you conclude from that is, if you look at the Quran in light of fill in the blank, you've already got a problem. You have to look at all things in light of the Quran. The Quran itself is light.
Right.
You can't shed light on light.
Exactly. So you're hitting on exactly what I'm talking about. You're changing the way people evaluate things. And
I'm not changing it. The Quran's timeless. It's already been there. If people attempt to change this view, we have to bring them back to what Allah is actually saying. This doesn't have to be a response, like a new counter response to an emerging deviation in thought. This is actually us reaffirming something Allah has been saying all along. وَكَلِمَةُ اللَّهِ هِيَ الْعُلْيَا. Allah's word is in the highest place. No bias, no agenda, no cult, no line of thinking will be put in a superior position. My personal biases as a human being will always be there. So even in my study of the Quran, as genuine as I try to be, I can't help but be human, right? So I'll see things that maybe somebody else can't see. And they can point that out later and say, Nouman said this about this ayah, but I feel his bias came in here. I may not have even seen my bias. And somebody else can see it later and point it out. That's fine. But if I openly say, hey, by the way, this is my bias, and now I'm going to find this in the Quran and show you why my bias was right all along. And finally, the Quran understands me. Finally, I understand the Quran. Finally, the Quran understands me. Okay, homie, you good luck with that.
and I think it's the beautiful part of the Quran. Like the name, one of the names of it is Al Furqan. Like it just literally divides. Well, I mean, truth from falsehood. And I think what Sim is talking about is like, I think let's give a more practical example. For example, we have the whole LGBTQ movement, right? And they're trying to say, reinterpret the story of Qawm Lut and be like, hey, you know what? It wasn't really about sodomy. It was because they were just aggressive and they were just not respecting. Yeah, they were just raping people, aggressive rapists out there. So it's not really about being a sodomite. It's really just because, you know, all these people were homophobic in the past, so they made it about sodomy, but it's or about homosexuality, but it's just really about rape. And I think that is what we're seeing as problematic. And here's the thing.
What's the word used? Let's not even go further. Let's pretend for a moment that argument has merit. For a moment. Atun al-fahisha, isn't the word used for their act fahisha?
Yes, fahisha.
Okay. In Surah An-Nisa, وَالَّذَانِ يَأْتِيَانِهَا مِنْكُمْ الْفَاحِشَةِ, right? When a young man and a woman, early Medina, when a young man and a woman have committed adultery, فَآذُوهُمَا, was that talking about rape? So one time the Quran uses fahisha, talk about rape, and the other time it doesn't talk about rape. It's talking about consensual sex. How did you come up with that decision? See, if you want to use a word and attribute a certain meaning to it, then you better be willing to consider that implication on all other places where it's being used. So when Allah says, you know, what is it? مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَمَا بَطَنَ. Right, so قل ربي إن ربي حرم الفواحش. I believe something to this effect. I'll pull it. Right, so Allah has forbidden al-fawahish. Is that Allah saying Allah has forbidden rapes, the ones that are open and the ones that are secret, and is not talking about anything else?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you want to make an argument, let's make the argument on a textual basis first, before I get offended about, oh my God, you're saying something. Okay, you know what? Let me hear you out, and let's look at what Allah says. Because we all agree this is Allah's word, so it's perfect. And Allah is pretty clear about what He says and what words He chooses to use. So does your argument hold up by even the words Allah used?
Yeah.
It doesn't. So I take a different approach. I don't get ideological about it. I don't get like, how dare you impose. No. It's the word of Allah. Let it defend itself.
Yeah, I think the difference is that you're in a position, mashallah, where you're able to take the breakdown of it. But one person will come out and say, well, you know, some of the earlier mufassirin took an understanding of this ayah and the word and actually, you know, context and, you know, it didn't really mean, you know, yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, like, they go, but this is the way it commonly goes down, right? Like this whole idea of, well, you know, one scholar said this, you know, like, and so it kind of just, you know.
I'd like to know.
And I think that's the problem where we are right now, where we're in this, and I think right now, like, and I don't know how, I think you've kind of disconnected off of social media for a while, but Muslim Twitter is wild. Like, I mean, it's just this, like, it's like a Serengeti right now, bro. Like, there's all kinds of stuff coming out.
I was social distancing before there was social distancing.
Yeah, and I'm like, and I look, and unfortunately, you know, sometimes we see this because we're just engaged because we're having a podcast and things, and people want to reach out, but all kinds of things that are like, and you know, and you don't even like, I don't even entertain them, to be honest. I'm of the opinion that if people are going to say crazy things, the best thing to do is to just not even acknowledge it, because it's just so crazy that I don't even want to even give it merit. Like, why even give it attention? Because a lot of it's for clout. A lot of it's for like, look at me. Hey, look at me. I'm different, right? I'm against the grain. But I just feel like right now, I just worry about like this next generation coming up and looking at, you know, the Quran from this postmodernist view that
generation. I'm really not. You know what I'm worried about? Whether or not we do our job giving them a grounding that is timeless. It's not, there's a new fitna, therefore we must protect them from this fitna. No, if you have the right grounding, if you are the religion of Ibrahim, then it doesn't matter what idols get produced. You know how to smash them.
Allah.
And that goes back to the Quran.
Their grounding is social media right now, and what the social currents are.
And that's not our doing. That's not a da'i's doing or the ummah's doing. That goes back to the very core of how we are at home.
Yeah.
What is it? And look, let's not complain about what's happening on social media. what I complain about is, what have we done to enable not very well educated mothers and fathers and husbands and wives for them to be able to empower themselves and their children with a grounding that can help them navigate the storm? We haven't given them the tools. We haven't empowered them. Tell me one effective Islamic school curriculum, right, with all the hundreds of millions of dollars in masjids that we've already spent. Yes? Yes? Tell me one curriculum that says by the time my child is 15 years old, they are confident of why they're Muslim, and when they go into public high school or in college, their faith will not be shaken. One curriculum that establishes this goal. Please, I'd like to see it.
It's so crazy that
after all the fundraisers we've had, all the money we've raised, all the buildings we've put up, all the chandeliers we've bought, all the new carpeting we've done, and all the Islamic school for the youth, brother, we've already got. Show me one methodology, one success story where we took a bunch of kids and when they went to the public non-Muslim environment, they were the Ibrahims of that environment.
Allah. Right. You know
what's so crazy? Dumbfound.
Yeah.
They were the ones standing there, and everybody else رَجَعُوا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ.
Right. They went back to themselves. Right. No, the thing is that it's so amazing because we were talking about this earlier on, like me, Mahin, and Sheikh. I mean, believe it or not, we have constructive conversations, even though we can be clowns. But we were thinking about this and we're like, why can't we create a curriculum? Like, you know how they have Sunday schools, right? There's nothing that, I mean, when we grew up going to Sunday school, the only thing that we really got was like this cultural Muslim identity, which was important, but it wasn't knowledge that we took and said, yeah, that's why I'm a Muslim, right? It was never like that wow factor, right? And we thought, like, why couldn't we just develop like this curriculum that we could disseminate to like all these different, Sunday schools that are out there, these these ragtag Sunday schools, and say, look, if you follow this curriculum properly, by the time the end goal, the result is that your child should be firmly rooted in Islam and understand why they are Muslim and be confident enough to represent themselves as Muslims in public.
I'll tell you my ambitious goal. You've seen a video or two of me teaching the Dream curriculum online on social media, and the couple of kids that are with me. My goal with those kids, and inshallah, thousands of kids around the world, but starting with those two kids, is that within a year's time, I want them to be able to read a tafsir in Arabic and translate it for me. That's where I'm going to get them. And I want to be able to get them to a point where I've gone through a bunch of Quran with them that I want them to have memorized, that I want them to have understood, that I want them to carry not just for knowledge's sake, but to carry as a worldview. So I want to take these kids, by the time they're 16, 17 years old, they have a different worldview. They have a Quran worldview. And that's what I'm grateful for in my journey. Somebody was able to give me a Quran worldview, right? And the ups and downs in my life aside, one thing that didn't go away is my Quran worldview, right? And that's the big, in my opinion, of all the blessings I've enjoyed in this life, that's the biggest blessing I've ever had, is somebody inculcating in me that I can see reality through Allah's word. I can see myself and what's going around me through Allah's word. And I may forget that sometimes, I may slip from it sometimes, but I can come back to it. And we need to give that to our kids. We have to have an engaging way, a loving way of giving that to them. And when you have that, then of course, ignorance will always be majority. So what you see on social media, it may not change, but the silent minority are the forces that change the world.
Yeah.
That's the reality of it. We need to focus our attention on the silent minority, not the loud majority. And when we produce that kind of quality, that silent minority will take benefit. When you guys are doing this cast or whatever, there's a few thousand people listening or whoever's listening, right? The majority of those people are not commenting. And you know what? The most valuable viewership you have is probably the people who are not commenting.
True.
Because they're the most engaged listeners.
No, you're right.
Funny you say that.
No, 100%. I agree.
You're right.
Yeah, I agree, because they're processing, they're listening, they're focused, they're attentive. They're not just distracted by what's happening in the text. Like right now, you could look at any YouTube feed right now and watch it. They'll be having arguments about something completely unrelated to what we're talking about. Like right now, for example, you mentioned that a particular scholar that you like, and they're arguing about that scholar. And look, we don't even care. Like, oh, okay, you don't like them, okay, but you just lost the whole benefit of what we're talking about. Yeah. Yeah. You know what I mean? And what, right? I mean, the thing is, like, but it's just like, that's what happens when people are the ones who are not really typing away are the ones that are actually processing what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think those are the most important listeners. Those are the ones who actually they listen more than they speak, and those are the ones that you actually want to captivate.
Yep.
The ones that you want to mold and help, because they're the one. And to be honest, when they give a feedback, it's really important because they're the ones who actually are paying attention. They're the ones that can give you the constructive criticism that you need to improve whatever you're doing. And I love listening to those kind of people.
You guys listen to stuff. You guys watch stuff on social media just like I do. I don't think I've ever commented while watching something. I think
once or twice I did. Yeah, but that was it. Yeah,
I'm too engrossed in learning something from someone unless they're asking a question or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And I say, man, now let me imagine me writing the same comment 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 times. And what cognitive process must I go? I can't imagine that version of myself. So I'm trying to empathize with the troll, and I can't figure out how these Russians work.
I think your default answer should be just learn Arabic. That should just be your default response to any troll. You know Arabic, bro? Just put it. You know how to go? You're mad, bro. Just put. You know Arabic, bro? Like just put it out there.
I have a friend. So there's some comments that came about like this Quran only sect, and Ustad Nouman kind of addressed a little bit. But so I have a buddy who's been like about the 19er theory for like 20 years.
Oh, that's cute.
Rashad Khalil's cute. And I was like, yo, bro, like, don't you even know? Like, he'd be like, oh, it says, follow Allah and follow the message. I was like, Rasul is not message, bro. You know what I'm saying? But like, it's like, again, just learn Arabic and you'll be good.
No,
rather than just being
what people who say that learn Quran, we only follow Quran. I gave a khutbah. This was 16 years ago. It was a very affluent masjid in Long Island where some of the prominent people that financed the masjid did not believe in anything the Prophet has to say. They were Quran, right? And they made the mistake of inviting me for khutbah. And I was back in my ideological days when I actually had one of them like Islamic beards and the no mustache situation, and I wore a turban to look more, like I belong to, an ancient time. That makes me more, like it's holier that way. The khutbah has more. So anyway, so I go up to give khutbah, and my khutbah was, I am going to talk about why we must all believe in the words of our Prophet ﷺ, and I will prove to you that we must believe in those words, but I will only prove to you that we should believe in them through the Quran. I'm only going to use the Quran. And after I'm done with this talk, I was so obnoxious, and when I'm done with this khutbah, I will wait here for anybody who would like to correct me. So فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ فِيمَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُم is what I started with back then. They have no faith whatsoever, Allah swears by himself, until they make you the decision maker over everything that sprouts between them. فيما يحكموك, not فيما يحكموا ما أنزلناه إليك, not فيما يحكم القرآن, فيما يحكموك فيما شجر بينهم. And so absolute submission to the verdict of Rasulullah ﷺ is the ayah, right? So I was like, the ayah says we have to surrender ourselves to the verdicts given by the Prophet ﷺ. And it doesn't say the Quran, he says the Prophet ﷺ.
And it's as if, subhanAllah, Allah has given us the replies to all the individuals in the Quran that will claim something else other than what Allah wants.
Yeah.
How powerful is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing by himself, subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
And then he tells you that you have to follow judgment Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is extreme. That if you truly believe in the Quran, will make, if you were of that position, will make you fall into sajda instantly, out of control, if you truly love the Quran.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much more powerful can it be?
See, that's the 19th thing, right? It comes back to the same principle. You developed a theory, and now that theory overarches the Quran. It's above the Quran. The Quran is not above your theory. Your theory is above the Quran. That's where the problem lies. The moment you start placing something above the Quran, and then engage in your exercise, your interpretation process, then it doesn't matter what conclusions you come out with, the problem will still remain the same. You didn't acknowledge the supremacy of Allah's word first.
SubhanAllah.
Man, you amaze me every time you just bring this up. I'll be honest, because like people, I mean, the Quran, it's not just you. I don't want to put it in your face, but I mean, just you remind me of what's in the Quran, like why the Quran is miraculous and special. People don't realize that. A lot of times we spend time listening to prolific speakers, and but less time do we spend actually talking about why the Quran in itself is sufficient. Like you don't need anything else.
Isn't it enough for them that we've sent the book down onto you that's being read onto them?
Allah.
I think it's so easy to put an end to an argument. Just there it is. Yeah.
Ustad Nouman, it was a pleasure having you. Any closing words that you'd like to leave our audience?
Wait. Who did you vote for, Trump or Biden?
Brother, voting.
Voting is haram, brother.
It's just 2 hours are coming up, and we're about to get cut off the stream. That's the only reason why, or else we could have done this for like 10 hours, dude.
Yeah, no, you can cut off the stream. I hope we get a chance to do it again sometime, inshallah.
I hope you come back. I hope it's like an odd thing where like, oh God, I did the Mamluks. Now I'm done with that checklist. We're never gonna go back. I hope it's not like one of those things.
Right, I thought you were someone else when you guys first emailed me.
Oh yeah, he told me he thought we were the Young Turks.
Because honest to God, I thought you guys were the Young Turks, and I was like, I don't think so. I'm gonna ignore this email. It's not my fault. The name is easily confused. I'm saying y'all are young, and
we just thought you didn't like us.
Mad all the time, so it was mad.
No, we just thought you didn't like us. We thought, oh my God, we're probably just too off the bat. It was probably just too whack for him.
I was scared of the situation. Well, we can do this again.
Inshallah, we'd love it. I think I think it's good. You know what it is? I think we have honest conversations, and I think it's important to have these. And I think very few people who are willing to pull back the curtain and just have these honest conversations. And I think regardless of being on the show or not, you always do that. And I think most people appreciate that authenticity that's there. I think a lot of production these days for the Muslims lacks that authenticity that people are looking for, that real honest.
Right? So it's a famous saying, it holds true. What comes out of the heart reaches hearts, and that's true of all of us in our personal lives, on the camera, off camera. If we have something sincere to say, Allah will give it wings, and if we don't have something sincere to say, then it will flop.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
Please make sure to let us know if you're coming through Chicago. And
Chicago Sharif.
Right now, I ain't coming through nowhere near Chicago.
Oh, right now, coronavirus. So, you don't want to come to Illinois,
Okay.
You guys are in a bad situation.
Yeah, Mahi the Trump supporter.
I wouldn't want to go to Chicago.
Are you not doing the lockdown? Are you guys doing remote stuff or what?
I'm on the Bayina campus right now, and I'm pretty much here every day. We keep it closed for the public. And this place has basically become a production studio for me, kind of.
Wait, so quick question about that. Are you going to be doing your dream program now completely remote versus like in person now?
I don't know when this pandemic settles down, but my dream program, the one that used to be held here physically, was retired a couple of years ago, actually. And because I realized I don't want to run a school, I want to run a resource that feeds schools. So now my agenda with the Dream program is to teach it once. This is the one time I'm teaching it, and I'm going to teach it. I didn't even put a timeline on it. I'm going to get these kids to the point where I feel like I've given them everything I can, and along with them, through them, inshallah, millions of people around the world.
Inshallah.
And once that's done, it doesn't just record, because the curriculum's already published. It's already open source. Anybody can use it in their schools if they want. It's a free PDF resource. It took years and years to develop, but it's there. But more important than the material is the way that it's taught, right? So, and the way that it's taught to struggling students. That's why I picked younger kids, because they're going to struggle through sarf and advanced nahu and i'rab, and then reading fluency, etc. They're going to struggle through that. And my job is to make sure that past those struggles, they succeed. So I could have taken like an adult who's already done some Arabic and fly through the material, but I want them to really stumble along the way and get them somewhere, right? And through that, I want to prove to the world that it doesn't matter that you didn't know anything when you started, that in a very short amount of time, you can reach an amazing place because, because Allah took this language and he made this a language to educate the world about his word for a reason, because it's learnable. It's got you can adapt to it. Doesn't, as intimidating as it might seem, we can crush the intimidation, right? So when that recording archive is there, people are following live, alhamdulillah. But when that archive is there, then teachers don't just have a curriculum. They can go back to lesson 50 and look at how I taught it and say, oh, that's the technique I need to use in my classroom, right? So the teaching method is being archived, which is the harder work. Putting a book together on Arabic is easy. How do you teach that? How do you make this hard lesson easy? That's the hard work, right? So that's what I'm working on. That to me is the more important thing, leaving that resource behind. And inshallah, while I'm doing that, my second main obligation is continuing my work on deeper study of the Quran. So I'm now finally, alhamdulillah, I'm at the last ayah of Surah Yusuf. That took about a year. Last Ramadan I started. So we're finally at the last ayah. I've had 3 lectures about the last ayah so far, probably another 2 before we conclude. And that's the pace at which we've been going. And then even finishing the last ayah, there's probably 6 or 7 more lectures on Surah Yusuf, its organization, its connections to the seerah, looked at in more depth. And then I'll go on to another surah. But my goal
is that what Sheikh Sohaib is helping you with as well too? Like the
Sheikh Sohaib. So I do the study of the nazm of the surah. I do the study of kind of the psychological dimension of the surah and the sociological and kind of those areas. Then I read over 1 or 2 tafsir, but then he's my comparative tafsir expert. So I'll go to him and he'll say, so I'll say, did you pick out anything from this ayah? And he'll say, yeah, Razi said something interesting. Let's go through it. Or Ibn Ashur said something. And he's like, oh, I was kind of disappointed with Alusi this time. He kind of dropped the ball on this one, etc. So we're going to go through a bunch of tafsir and discuss what they had to say. And then we geek out over that stuff. But my job is to bring it back to humanity at the end of that discussion and say, okay, let's talk in human now. So the point is this, and this, right? Okay, that's this and this. And then one of the hardest study for us now, because we're holding ourselves to a little bit of a higher standard, is etymology study. So when it comes to the root meanings of words, we've committed ourselves to one particular resource that we think is kind of above the cut over the classical works, and that's Hassan Jabal's work, Al-Mu'jam al-Ishtiqaqi al-Mu'assal. It's tough read and tough to make the connection to what we're reading with it, but it's worth the exercise. It's worth the work. So he helps me with that on a daily basis. I do those lectures 3 times a week here, and then I teach my intensives go for 10 days in a row, and then eventually they'll taper off to just 5 days a week with those kids. But that's pretty much what I keep myself busy with.
Nice. Morda, you have an announcement?
Yeah, just real quickly. So there's a school in Pakistan. I got noticed earlier today that they're a school for orphans. Their generator went down, and it's like really run by people who just depend on donations. So we're gonna be putting a link down in the description. If you guys want to go and help them out, it'd be wonderful. We're trying to raise 20 grand for them, but it's really a school just strictly for orphans that they don't pay for anything for it. It's all out of donations. But unfortunately, they had some issue with their generators, and so we'll be putting a link down in the description. So anybody that wants to get some extra ajr, inshallah, just go ahead and make sure you donate to them, inshallah.
Ustad Nouman, thank you again. For our listeners, please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, and make sure you comment down below and let us know your thoughts. Let us know your thoughts on the episode. We usually in this space, people mention sponsors and things like that. We don't have that. It's because you guys asked us, hey, just make it without sponsors and set up Patreon. So help us out on patreon.com/the Alternatively, if you want to help us out through PayPal, go to email us or send us your payment through themadmamluks.com/donate. All right. And for my co-hosts, Mort, Maheen, and Sheikh Hammer, my name is Sim. We'll see y'all later. Assalamu alaikum.
All right.
Yeah.